Coming up, we're going to hear from the Center for Immigration Studies, Mark Krikorian. He discusses the Trump administration's plans for DACA, and we'll talk about his perspective on that. That conversation coming up when Washington Journal continues.
Washington Journal continues.
Our next guest of the morning, Mark Krikorian, the Center for Immigration Studies, serves as their executive director, here to talk about the president's announcement yesterday. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, tell us a little bit about, for those who don't know, the Center for Immigration Studies. What's the position that you take on immigration, legal and illegal?
We're a think tank that supports tighter controls on immigration, better enforcement, and lower levels of legal immigration. Basically because mass immigration isn't really an appropriate policy in a modern society in a way that, say, 100 or 200 years ago, we could have made it work. Today, we're just in a different world. The immigrants really aren't all that different. We're different.
And so when it comes to the president's decision yesterday, what do you think about the mechanics of what he introduced and the way he did it?
Well, he really had to do this. I mean, he should have done it in January. DACA is an unlawful program. I mean, the Attorney General described this yesterday, and there's simply no excuse for it. The people who are defending DACA are essentially saying the end justifies the means. They're saying that because these are sympathetic illegal immigrants, and I personally think that Congress should put together a deal that includes amnesty for them, but it has to be done lawfully. And Obama couldn't get it through Congress, and so he did it unlawfully. So the president had to end it, and he sent it back to Congress, which is kind of what we want a president to do, to say, look, the lawmakers should be the one who make law, and now they have a chance to do that.
The previous guest, Al Green, talked about the various legislative proposals on this and said a sticking point was offering citizenship to those particularly who might be affected by that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, well, it's not citizenship. You'd give them a green card, which is permanent residence, and then if after a certain number of time they qualify, they have to take a test, et cetera, then they could get citizenship if they wanted to. I'm for that. I mean, the idea of having second-class kind of residence, that's just a mistake. But the real sticking point is not that. The real sticking point is, should a bill simply give amnesty to the DACAs and nothing else, or should there be provisions included to try to limit or contain the harmful fallout from an amnesty? Because every amnesty draws more illegal immigration, because you're sending a message abroad that you can get away with it. So that's the real sticking point. It's not, do they get green cards or do they just get a kind of permanent work visa? That is a debate. The real holdup, though, is will there be a package that includes legal immigration reductions and enforcement tightening as part of the amnesty, or won't there? That's the real issue.
So specifics, what should be in this package?
Well, and as far as the enforcement goes, the most important thing that Congress needs to deliver is an E-Verify mandate. E-Verify is a free online system employers can use when they hire somebody, and they collect their Social Security, IRS information. You have to do that anyway. This is an online system where you can check whether that person's telling you the truth. A lot of people use it. Last year, about half of all new hires were screened through this. My own center uses it. A lot of people do. But it's not mandatory. And so making that mandatory is something only Congress can do. That's number one. Because look, you don't want tomorrow another family of illegal immigrants to be able to get here and stay here for 20 years with their 3-year-old, and then you end up with having to do another DREAM Act later. But the other part is that every amnesty creates downstream legal immigration surges, because our system, the way it is now, is if you have relatives, you get to bring the relatives. Not just husband, wife, and little kids, which everybody agrees, but adult parents, siblings, what have you. And so those provisions, those categories of the legal immigration system need to be eliminated. This is something that Senator Tom Cotton and Senator Perdue from Georgia have introduced legislation called the RAISE Act. So to put it in shorthand, E-Verify and the RAISE Act combined with an amnesty for the DACAs would actually be a sensible move that doesn't solve everything in immigration, but gives everybody a little bit of something that they want.
The lines are be on the screen. Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. Illegal immigrants, if you want to give perspective on the events of the last day or so, 202-748-8003. What about the 6-month deadline? Is that realistic to come up with something?
Well, 6 months is a long time. I mean, it's half a year. I mean, I don't know. Is it realistic? Yes, they could do it tomorrow if they wanted to. The question is, can the Congress get its act together and do something in 6 months? I think they can if they're actually interested and motivated in doing it, yes. I frankly, I mean, this is Monday morning quarterbacking now, but I think the president should have done this in January as soon as he took over, as he had promised to do during the campaign, and then given, say, till the end of the year. So that would have been even more time. But the point is, giving them a grace period makes sense. And even when that grace period is over, it's only the case that the DACA permits will begin to expire. It'll take 2 whole years for everybody to lose their DACA work permits if nothing happens. So there's it's not just a 6-month, it's really a 2.5-year window that Congress has to act, and even Congress should be able to act in that period.
Earlier in the program, we saw the statement from the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the head of the Left of Business Council, because of the decision made yesterday. But he made the case about the economic impact, some $280 million or $1 billion or added to the economy because of the work of Dreamers. Yeah. What do you think about that economically? And is this a risk, taking those people out of the workforce and potentially the economic benefit they bring?
No, because it's confusing 2 issues. One issue is, should DACA exist? The other is, should the young people covered by DACA, I mean, they're in their 30s, a lot of them, so they're not kids, but should those people be given legal status? Those are 2 separate questions. You can be for one and be against the other. DACA is an unlawful program, and it has to be ended. If you're arguing that we should keep DACA because of economics or anything else, you're saying the end justifies the means, and the end does not justify the means.
But you're saying, though, just to reiterate, that legislatively you would support a fix depending on what's in that fix.
Yeah, absolutely.
First call for you is from New York, Republican line. This is Peter from Valley Cottage, New York. You're on with our guest, Mark Krikorian. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Krikorian. Pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you.
There's something that I don't understand, and maybe you can explain it. I keep reading in the paper and seeing in the news that the building industry is complaining that they don't have enough labor and that they can't keep up with, with building homes because they don't have enough cheap labor. And also people in the agricultural industry are saying the same thing. I don't understand. We have between 15 and 30 million people here illegally. We bring in over a million people into the country a year, but yet they're complaining that they don't have enough labor. I don't get it. I don't understand. Is the economy growing that quickly that they don't have enough people because they wanted to increase? They already increased the HB2 visas. Can you please explain that, sir? Thank you.
Well, because what we're really talking about is employers always want a looser labor market. What that means is where there's more people chasing around fewer jobs. That puts employers in the driver's seat. It makes their job easier. It's easier to recruit people. They don't have to pay them as much. If there's somebody who's difficult, they can get rid of them and replace them easily. That's what employers always want. But for employees, for workers, the best option is a tight labor market where there's fewer people chasing more jobs, so that the workers are in the driver's seat and they can say, no, I actually like a raise, and the employers actually have to pay attention to them. So the whole point here is that immigration loosens the labor market, and that's why business always is in favor of more legal immigration, looser enforcement of the laws, more guest worker programs, because it always loosens the labor market, makes their job easier. And so the question really for policymakers and for people thinking about policy is, who are you rooting for? What do you want to do? Do you want to make life easier for ordinary workers, or do you want to make life easier for employers and businessmen? It's not always a fixed pie. Sometimes both people can benefit, but there are times, especially in immigration, where you have to decide, who are you rooting for? I'm rooting for ordinary workers as opposed to the employers.
Republican line, Bronx, New York. Eduardo, hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Go ahead, you're on.
Hello, I'm on?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I want to... yeah, hello, how you doing? Good morning, anyway. I just want to talk about... this gentleman said that... he said that the DACA people is, it's an unlawful thing, and that the president should have did that since he got into office. But you know what? Look at the picture, okay? Since the president been in office, he been on investigation. He had break many laws, and nobody had done nothing to him, okay? All them neo-Nazis that you brought here from the World War II, okay? War criminals. We gave them citizenship, okay, to use them. Like we took all the scientists. We went to the moon. Because a German scientist was a mass murderer.
So, Eduardo, your question about DACA to our guest, please. Go ahead.
About DACA, I think it's a shame what they're doing. It's a shame of the president, and what the president's doing is he's been hiding. My question about DACA?
We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
What do you think for that?
Well, I mean, the law has to be enforced. I mean, a lot of the DACAs are sympathetic people. I mean, the media makes them out all to be valedictorians and all that. That's nonsense. They're regular people. Some are good, some are bad, just like anybody else. But if there's a case to make for legalizing them, then it's the job of lawmakers to make law. It's not the job of the president. And President Obama himself, before issuing this DACA decree for political expediency purposes, had said that he didn't have proper authority to do that.
From Lake Havasu City, Arizona, Mickey, hello.
Hello, good morning. It seems like everybody is blaming Trump. I think that's a little bit far-fetched. This problem's been here long before him. Obama gave us a Band-Aid on a situation that is totally out of hand, and Trump did exactly what he should have done. It's kind of like, for me, I don't know, we kind of talk all around the problem. It's like being in a boat with a hole in it. And you can scoop water out, but you have to plug the hole. So I don't know if it's what the Bill of Rights. Somehow or another, we have to disallow illegal children into our public schools. That's the hole. You can't solve this problem by letting illegals come and stick. Or have a sign out that says, come on, bring your kids, get them into school, and then you've got a ride. It doesn't work. You have to plug the hole.
Yeah, the basic point the caller's making is right in that amnesty doesn't solve anything. I mean, the metaphor she's using, the image of bailing out the boat before you plug the hole is correct. You've got to fix the problem before you talk about, tying up the loose ends or bailing out the boat. You got to plug the hole first. And amnesty is an example of basically bailing out the boat. There's no question about it. But the Dreamers really are a special case. This is why I think you can make a case for amnestying them up front as part of a deal that includes enforcement, because they're different from other illegal immigrants. They didn't break the law because they were minors. They didn't have the capacity to make the decision to break the law, especially those who grew up here from a very young age. Their identities are American. So there's a good case to make for that. But the broader issue of legalizing the rest of the illegal population shouldn't even be a discussion until we plug the hole, until we fix the problem.
Let's take a listen to one of those perspectives that I brought up. This is Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina talking about the resurrection, or at least what they like to see is the DREAM Act come forward. Here's a bit of what they had to say yesterday.
The decision that was announced today by the Trump White House was a disappointment to me. The first and only direct conversation which I've had with President Trump was the day of his inauguration, and I thanked him for the kind words he said about Dreamers and DACA. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Don't worry about those kids. We're going to take care of those Dreamers." I trusted that the president would do that, and I hoped to work with him. We had many meetings in the White House with people on his staff talking about how we might achieve that goal of making certain that the Dreamers would have their day and their opportunity. Well, today, this announcement that was handed down first by Attorney General Sessions and then by the president tells us that the clock is ticking. We are now in a countdown toward deportation for 780,000 protected by DACA today. For those young men and women across America, I can tell you this is a moment of great concern, great fear, and great anxiety about what's going to happen to their lives. They include teachers and engineers, medical students at Loyola School of Medicine in the city of Chicago, who are uncertain now about their future. Well, what Senator Graham and I want to deliver as the message today is that we need to do our job right here in the United States Senate. We need to pass in this month of September a DREAM Act, a permanent law in this country that says that these young people will have their chance to become part of America's future.
So as far as not only what they talked about the DREAM Act, talk about this idea of the numbers involved, the 780,000, and the effectiveness of deporting them.
Yeah, I mean, just as a detail, 780,000 people have gotten DACA at some point over the past 5 years, but right now it's actually 690,000 roughly that have DACA today. Some people got green cards, other people didn't renew, that sort of thing. So it's 700,000 or 800,000 doesn't make the big difference, but the important point that Senator Durbin brought up really is kind of a scare tactic that they're all going to be deported, that as soon as your work permit expires, that ICE is somehow going to knock on your door the next morning and say you got to go. That's not the way law enforcement works. There's something like 12 million illegal immigrants in the country. If a DACA person loses his work permit and his DACA protections, he might well get deported, but almost certainly it's going to be if he engages in some kind of problematic behavior, gets arrested, what have you. Some people with DACA have been deported because they've committed crimes or what have you. That'll continue. But the idea that 700,000 or 800,000 people are going to be rounded up just because the government has their information is it's false. It's a scare tactic.
From Florida, Ingrid is next. Democrats line for our guest, Mark Krikorian.
Good morning. Yes, sir. I recall a short time ago that President Trump did that H-1 visa or H-2, I forget what it's called, for workers at his Mar-a-Lago place for people to work for him. No wonder he says he loves them. And I thought that I've heard that President Reagan did the same thing as Obama, and that President Bush Sr. did the same thing that Obama did. So I don't know why you're calling it unconstitutional, and I can't figure out what side you're on. Thank you.
There's two issues there. First, you brought up the use of these guest worker visas. H-2B is the particular kind of visa. President's property down there in Florida does, in fact, use them. But even during the campaign, he talked about, well, it's necessary, we can't find workers. It's kind of the usual businessman nonsense about we need to bring in workers. So, I mean, you know, the president, he has these sort of, businessman instincts about immigration. Many of them are not good. So there's a lot that I don't agree with on the president. That's what she was talking about, and that's clearly something that's got to be changed. The other point about other presidents having done something like DACA is partly true, but not true enough to actually be true, which is to say that previous presidents have used this idea of deferred action on a much smaller scale, and Congress was okay with letting the president use the discretion they gave him in a very limited, specific fashion. What Obama did is dial it up to 11. He said, look, I took this limited discretion for individual exceptional cases and just blew it out and gave it to hundreds of thousands of people. That's a usurpation of power, and that's what the Attorney General was talking about as unconstitutional.
It was on the Facebook post that the President Obama put out there. He said he did so in part based on the well-established legal principle of prosecutorial discretion.
Yeah, prosecutorial discretion is what it means. It's a fancy word. What it means is that you decide in the real world whether you're going to prosecute somebody, but you've got two people, you only have time to prosecute one of them, you decide, well, we're going to go after this guy and not that guy. What the president did is use that as a pretext to establish this expansive program that gave benefits to hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants. That's not a proper use of prosecutorial discretion.
There are a couple of things. There's a story today in USA Today talked about Apple and Microsoft saying that they were pledging to shield employers who could face legal troubles or deportation over this act. The governor of Ohio, John Kasich, was on the news today saying they're inviting the folks who might fall on this to come to Ohio. What do you think about those avenues and the resistance it might prove to this effort on the president with DACA?
Depends what they're doing, because harboring illegal immigrants is a federal crime. If Apple wants or Facebook or whatever want to actually harbor illegal immigrants, people they know to be illegal immigrants, and they are continuing to employ them, for instance, that's a federal crime, and they should be prosecuted for that if that's what they engage in. But lawful opposition to the president's action is perfectly appropriate. This doesn't sound like lawful opposition to me.
Republican line, Sarah from Sandston, Virginia.
Good morning. I am calling because I'm just so concerned. We are a society in which we want everyone to be equal. We have a whole group of people that are scared to be in the United States. That's what illegal immigration breeds. It breeds a group of people that have to hide in shadows, take less for their wages, cannot demand a raise, cannot get assistance unless they can skirt around some way. This is not what America is. America is, please come here. We want you to work. We want you to have the same benefits. We want your child to have the same education as our children. We want you to get the good paying, qualified job that you are entitled to. But that's what we're asking. Come across the border legally, and that's what we offer you. But if you come across illegally, why should we offer anything?
Okay, caller, thanks.
Well, Sarah's point is right in that we want a society of people with equal access to the law, and in other words, equal citizens, a republic of equal citizens. And illegal immigration that we wink at, which is what's happened for a long time, undermines that. As she pointed out, this is why there's really kind of two options. One is you just let everybody in the world move here. And frankly, there are a lot of people here in Washington who believe that there should be no limits on immigration. That's not a real world position, though. The alternative is whatever limits we set, we need to actually enforce. What we have now is limits in the law, numerical limits and various requirements that we kind of don't really enforce, and if you sneak in anyway, we'll let you stay. That's no way to run a system, and you end up, as the caller suggested, with a whole class of people who are not equal citizens to the rest of us, and that's bad news.
We'll hear from Dennis, Burlington, North Carolina.
Yes, Denise. I am just calling because it's very upsetting to me to see people call in basically saying we support people breaking the law. I think we've had enough problems in this country with people not following the law, and people keep saying that, and this is what's very upsetting to me most of all. You have people supposed to be in news organizations, supposed to give people information, and they're lying. People keep quoting articles about Microsoft and Apple saying they're going to support, these illegal aliens if the laws are passed against them. But what about the the article in Politico that actually said, well, this summer, because of the crackdown on illegal immigration, companies had to hire Americans. Oh, my God. And they had to pay them higher wages. Oh, my God. I mean, we just had a U.S. congressman in a segment before, and he spent most of his time talking about DACA. And I'm like, okay, this is an African-American a congressman, and his community, black community, was suffering before Hurricane Harvey hit. And and this is the thing that just makes me the most upset, and this is my last point. You had this congressman who's a Democrat, and you had President Obama who passed DACA, and it was a cruel thing for him to do because it ensured that these people would never get citizenship, that they had to constantly...
Gotcha, Denise. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 points I wanted to make in response to Denise's comments. The first is that, as Barbara Jordan, the civil rights pioneer, had said 20 years ago when she was the head of an immigration commission, she said, the goal of our immigration system should be this. People who should be allowed in are let in. People who should not be allowed in are kept out. And people who shouldn't be here are made to leave. That's the kind of clear statement of what our immigration policy is supposed to be about that we're not seeing. And I think on the Houston issue, I'm glad she brought that up, because we're now seeing a flood of stories saying, well, Houston needs even more illegal immigrants because who's going to rebuild Houston? Well, there's a lot of people in Houston who didn't have work. Not just black Americans, but it's disproportionately hits black Americans. And, you know, the idea, the proponents of immigration all along, not just in specifically if we're talking about Houston, but everywhere, basically are saying that Americans in general, black Americans in particular, but they don't necessarily have to specify it, just aren't all that good as far as workers go. They're kind of defective. So let's bring in people who are better. And that's just an abhorrent perspective, it seems to me.
You are quoted this morning in a New York Times story taking a look at Jeff Sessions' announcement yesterday, and here's the quote, saying, quote, "The White House needed him, Mr. Sessions, to do this because I don't think Trump would have delivered a convincing performance." They describe you as a Sessions ally and executive director of the center that you are. You go on to say his own body language and ad-libbing would have undercut his message. If you said that, could you expand on that?
Yeah. What I meant was that the president really does seem ambivalent about this issue. And I think his comments over the years, even Senator Durbin's reference to what he had said to the president on Inauguration Day suggests that. The president is torn on this. He doesn't know what to do. I think he's getting differing advice. He's got a lot of liberal Democrats now basically staffing the White House. And so if he were to make the announcement, I think it would have been a much more half-hearted, ambivalent announcement. And as we saw, he tweeted last night something to the effect that I've given Congress 6 months, but if they don't pass a bill, well, maybe I'll revisit it then.
Did he give himself an escape hatch then? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's basically told the Democrats, you don't have to negotiate because he's almost negotiating with himself. Maybe he ghostwrote, maybe he had somebody ghostwrite the art of the deal, because that's not how you make deals, by negotiating with yourself on day one.
This is the tweet the guest referenced. This was sent out by the president yesterday, particularly in which he says Congress has 6 months to legalize DACA. If they can't, I will revisit the issue, is what he said. Rooney is next in Georgia, Democrats line. Rooney from Georgia?
It's Ronnie.
Ronnie, go ahead.
Yeah. The question I have, what about legalizing? We have illegal aliens here, but what about the people that are hiring them? What is the problem there? There's no law to punish those individuals, whether it be in agriculture or construction. There's no law there, and we're not addressing that. You are jumping over the situation by saying it's the illegal alien problem. No, it's the people that's hiring these people and getting away with it because of cheap labor. And it's modern day slavery. And you know this, and you continue to hold this accountable as it's okay. I'd like to hear your comments, sir.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your call, Ronnie, and no, it's not okay. That was what we saw in 1986, where Congress had an amnesty, but at that same time, the trade-off was that for the first time ever, they made it illegal to hire illegal immigrants. Before 1986, hard as this is to believe, it was legal to hire illegal aliens. The problem is, in the past 30 years, there's been no real enforcement on this. We just published a small book on this topic, actually, by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Jerry Kammer. Starts with a K, Kammer. It's on Amazon. And it traces the history of the failure of enforcing immigration laws at the work site. So I agree completely. Now, illegal immigrants are breaking the law, and they're responsible. They're grown-ups. They're responsible for their decisions. But we need to start seeing some employers being not just fined, but arrested. We need to see some perp walks on TV, guys in handcuffs, to send the message that the illegal immigrants are responsible, but the people hiring them, which is what's drawing them here in the first place, are also responsible.
Do you think that it's going to come to that?
Yes, I've actually talked to some people, and the problem is not so much some nefarious White House plot to not go after businessmen. ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is organized in such a way that has two main divisions. One does the deportation part, and that's quite active, and that's not a problem. The other part does the customs matters, like counterfeit Gucci purses and all kinds of things, as well as worksite enforcement. And the problem is that the people who work in that more customs-oriented department, they don't care about immigration law. They don't want to do immigration enforcement. So it's almost kind of a bureaucratic personnel issue to force a change in priorities. I've been assured that's in the works. I'd like to see some actual results.
Assured by whom?
By people inside DHS.
How and within what time frame?
I don't know. I haven't gotten a good handle on that. I wish I knew. And I'm not sure they knew. I mean, they know it's a problem, but we're going to see some real worksite enforcement. But people need to keep demanding it and keep making that point because it's politically important too. Because Americans see illegal immigrants being taken into custody and deported, and that is an appropriate thing. But they also need to see, for the legitimacy of that process, that employers are also paying a price, the crooked employers. And that's one reason. Another reason we need this E-Verify system for everybody, because a lot of employers who are hiring illegal immigrants don't necessarily know who's illegal and who isn't. They may suspect, but most employers hiring illegal immigrants are not crooks. They're just in a position where they really don't know, and their competitors are hiring them, and so they don't want to ask too many questions. When everybody's on an even playing field, then the legitimate employers will comply, and we know who the real crooks are, and we can go after them hard.
To what level then is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other business type groups involved in this issue, particularly what happens with those under DACA?
Well, the Chamber has always been quite active on the immigration issue. DACA less so because it's not really a business-related thing, but they've been one of the biggest obstacles to having a tight immigration policy because the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has consistently argued for looser enforcement and higher levels. I have to say, though, they did agree in the previous Congress to a bill requiring this E-Verify system. And so they have played a constructive part. What we need to see is people in Congress pushing that legislation, as I said before, packaging it with a DACA amnesty to sort of sweeten the pot and give everybody something. And we might actually see some, incremental but real progress.
Mark Krikorian is with the Center for Immigration Studies. CIS.org is the website if you want to check out what they're about and the positions they take. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.